welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. The purpose of this speaker series that we're doing is to give a more longer format for candidates to introduce themselves, speak to their policy goals, who they are, and why they should be the Democratic candidate come primary elections. It also gives you all the opportunity to learn about these candidates and make a more informed choice into who you think could represent us either in Congress or at the state level for governor. So we have a bunch of installments for this schedule. Be sure to look on our Facebook page for the upcoming series. So the format of this is going to be, we're going to have two candidates, one congressional and then one governor. Each candidate is going to have an hour allotted to them. How they choose to divvy up that hour is completely up to them. So they have two portions of it. The first is introduction. They can spend however many minutes they want introducing themselves. That can be 5, 10, 15. The rest will be question and answer. So I will maybe ask them questions, and we'll definitely open up to the audience to ask the questions that are most concerning to you. Okay, so going right into it. We are going to introduce our first Wisconsin 6th Congressional District for the Democratic primary, and that is Aaron Wojciechowski.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking time out of your Sunday to be here on this gorgeous day. I'm from Oshkosh, so I have to drive through Fond du Lac and then take the highway all the way over here. And I was just saying how I'm consistently reminded about how beautiful our state is, and especially this district. You get to see all the rolling hills, the farmland, and just always a reminder of how beautiful this district is. But my name is Aaron Wojciechowski, or Wojo for short, and I am one of the candidates running for the 6th Congressional District against Glenn Grothman. And so my background primarily has been in education. I worked for the Oshkosh Area School District for a number of years, and now I work at Lawrence University in higher education. During that time, the last 10 years, I've also spent being in public service. I had the great honor of being elected to the Winnebago County Board and served 4 years. I was elected at 19, and at the time was the youngest elected official in all of Wisconsin. That's no longer the case, but it inspired me and it taught me how government should work without all the partisan mudslinging that we see now at the federal and state level. I had the honor of serving on the Information Systems Committee. I was the secretary, and then I became the chair during my second term. They put me on that committee because I'm young and they thought I would know a lot about technology. I did, but during my time on that committee, we had the opportunity to reduce costs, to implement more sustainable programs, and make sure that our infrastructure, our technological infrastructure in the county was up to date. After that, I ran for the state senate in the 18th district. I was the last Democrat to run before the maps changed, so it was a heavily gerrymandered Republican district. I ran, and despite losing, I was the only Democrat, at least in modern history, to receive more votes in the primary than the Republican candidate. So that was really exciting. We didn't end up winning, we came up short, but now after the maps have been changed, we have a Democrat who's representing us. So everything we do moves the marker a little bit further, just like we're going to do in this district here. And so I took some time to myself to live my life a little bit because, like I said, I had gotten involved really early and hadn't really quite figured out what I wanted to do in my life. Then COVID hit. And at the time, our mayor, Lori Palmieri, who now is my state representative, encouraged me to run for council. She was the mayor, and she said, hey, I think you would be a great person to serve with me. I think we could get a lot of great things accomplished. And so I decided to run for the Oshkosh City Council. I was in a 9-way primary, and I received the most votes out of all the other candidates. And so that told me that people, despite losing in a partisan race, they wanted me and they wanted my ideas at the local level. And so I served on the Oshkosh City Council for 2 years. My entire time on the council was COVID. And so I was there when the government shut down businesses, when everything was in lockdown. I was there during the middle of it when we had to respond to this unprecedented crisis. And I was there when we decided to finally lift the lockdown so we could return to normal and start rebuilding our community, rebuilding our economy. And so I am no stranger to unprecedented times. And these times right now are quite unprecedented and require a strong response. Someone who is not just gonna hide under the radar, but someone who will fight back against this Trump regime, this administration, and what they're doing to our country. And so, before I get into it, let me back up a little bit and let you know how I got to this point. And so, I grew up in Wisconsin to a working class, low-income family. My mother, both my parents actually, worked long hours. They would come home around 6 o'clock, and me and my siblings had to take care of each other growing up. So my mom started in the manufacturing industry, and I'm so proud to be, all these labor signs behind me because we grew up in a very much labor-focused family. So she started on the floor of a factory, worked her way up to management. My dad, after serving in the military, opened his own business fixing computers at a time when not many people had computers. So I did learn about technology at a really early life. I spent my first, time working in his business, breaking down boxes, cleaning up, and learning the value of hard work, at all levels. And so, being low income, we obviously didn't have a lot. We, had hand-me-down clothes. Me and my brothers relied on our school's free lunch program just to get by. My sister dealt with medical issues her entire life, and I'm sad to say she unfortunately lost the battle to that. And despite my parents having to go through that heartbreak, it was not enough to just go through that, then the bills came. And I saw at a young age how medical bills can completely break a family and your economic safety. And so that's why when we talk about my policies, healthcare is one of my number one priorities, because I know firsthand how healthcare is broken in this country. But despite all those hardships that my family faced, they still worked as hard as they could to provide a good life for me and my siblings. And it's why I was the first in my family to graduate from college. And it's why I am now here as a candidate for Congress, because of my family and my upbringing. And I'm so proud to be here to share my values, because I think those are the values that we need in Congress. Everyday working class people who understand that, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, that we can't afford these increased prices that are happening as a result of tariffs or now a war in the Middle East. And so there are two main reasons why I decided to run for Congress during this time. One, as I've said, and I always say, I feel as though the working class has been left behind, especially by this administration. But this is going back further and further. As someone who knows what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, I understand right now that life is increasingly becoming too unaffordable for individuals and households. Be it grocery prices, now electricity prices, healthcare, you name it, everything is going up. Gas, I just saw the other day, it was under $3, and now it's almost $3.20 right now because of what's happening across the world, thanks to this president. And so, while we are struggling just to get by, just to afford basic necessities, we have politicians in DC who are busy fighting for more power or participating in insider trading to make themselves more rich, while we, the working class, the everyday person who keeps our economy going, is struggling just to get by. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, and this is probably pretty obvious, but our current congressman, quite frankly, is a clown. And I could go on and on about his poor performance, but just a couple of things. It's been over a year since Glenn Grothman has hosted an in-person town hall, preventing his constituents from even talking, even just getting basic information about what's happening in our country. That is the base level responsibility of a representative, is to let their constituents know what's happening in our country and what they're doing. That's not happening. Glenn Grothman has a 10% rating, lifetime score with the AFL-CIO. I was just at a labor dinner last night in Fond du Lac, chatting with folks from different unions and labor groups, and the response every time I said, hey, I'm running against Glenn Grothman, it was typically a very nasty response based on his performance. Glenn Grothman is not an ally to labor, to unions, or the working class. He voted for, and pardon my language, but he voted for what I call the bigger bullshit bill, which adds $5 trillion to the national debt and cut $1 trillion to our healthcare, where low-income families relied on that just to get their basic needs met. And as we've seen and how he's voted, he does not support releasing the Epstein files and holding people accountable. Based on everything we've seen, he has yet to give a statement on even the state of things that are happening around that. He's on the oversight committee. He is the person who should be asking the tough questions, who should be holding folks like Pam Bondi accountable. Thank goodness she is no longer in her position. But instead of asking these tough questions, holding them accountable, he spent his time praising her for the work that she's done. It's laughable at this point. And so, like I said, I could go on and on about Glenn Grothman's poor performance, but what we've seen and what we know is that we are not even getting the very basic, the low bar of basic representation from him. And so we're seeing across this district that people are fed up with it. And I've talked to Democrats, independents, and Republicans, and they are not happy about what's going on. They're not happy with the Trump administration. Basically, every promise he made, he's completely done the opposite of it. And so I see a great opportunity to flip this district this year. It is a tough district. We have had Glenn Grothman for the last 12 years. We've had some great candidates in the past, but I think a lot of it does have to do with timing. And this is a time when people are fed up with what is happening in our country, the current state of politics, and they want something new. It doesn't matter what party you have behind your name. They want someone who is going to engage respectfully, talk to them like a human being, someone who has actual policies, and I look forward to getting into those and answering your questions about them, but also someone who is going to call out the bullshit when we see it, who is not afraid to say, no, that's not correct. You are not accurately representing what's happening. And I know you all seen on social media and in the news the amount of lies that have come out from this administration, and Glenn Grothman's lack of spine to stand up to those lies and tell us the truth. And so, again, I'm Aaron Wojciechowski, or Wojo, and I'm really excited to be running for this position. We're in a very competitive primary, and I'm honored to be one of the leading candidates as of this time, having raised the most funds, having great social media outreach, and inspiring young people especially. We know that the next generation has to be engaged, and they have to be the force that helps us get over that finish line in November. And so I'm incredibly honored to be here, especially paired up with Kelda, who will be speaking after me, a great friend of mine, and a great legislator and leader. But we have a real opportunity this year to flip not just the House, flip our state legislature, retain the governorship, and make sure that we have a government that reflects our values and that will fight for us and actually tell us what's happening in our country. So that's my intro. I'm here to answer your questions, to delve into the policies that I have on my website and my platform. I'm very proud to be one of the few candidates, I think, who actually delves into what I want to do. If you go on my website, wojoforcongress.com, in my issues section, I go into great detail about the things I want to do. I know I'm not going to accomplish all those things overnight, because that's just how government works. And despite us having the opportunity to flip the House, Republicans will still control the Senate and the presidency. So we need someone who knows how to work with people across the aisle, people of differing political values, to get our priorities and our agenda done. And having served on the Winnebago County Board, and if you don't know much about Winnebago County, it is a very red district, a very red county. But I worked with people who were far right, and we were still able to get things done. On the council, I was able to lower the fine for marijuana, build more affordable housing, and have a legit response to how we tackle COVID, despite having people who didn't agree with me, and oftentimes we butt heads. But what I learned is when you actually talk to people as like a human being, treat them with respect, we can get a lot done. And so that's the same values and the same strategy I'm going to bring to Congress with the folks that we're going to have to work with to get the things I want to get done and the things you want to see in our country. And so I know we have questions, so I'm open, ready to answer those questions. And if you have questions, I'd love to hear them, because I want you to be able to express the concerns that you have, the vision that you want to see, and have that open dialogue. So again, thank you for being here, and we'll move move on to the questions.
So I'll start with the non-policy related questions. It's more just like state of our government and our political parties at the moment. So the average age of members of the U.S. House of Representatives is 57. The average age of U.S. Senate members is 64. And the average age of their constituents is about 40 years old. According to a recent Axios article, an anonymous senior Democratic U.S. House member stated, constant internal talk of generational change is, quote, pissing people off, unquote. As the youngest candidate in the CD6 Democratic primary, what is your opinion on generational change within the party? And what is your response to people who may believe that you may be too young?
Thank you for that question, that's great. We need generational change. And overwhelmingly, it's funny because it's typically the older folks, when I am around this district or at events talking to people that are excited about a young person running. Obviously, young people are excited about another young person running because they can see themselves reflected in that. They can see someone who hasn't been corrupted by the system or someone who won't, bend the knee to it. But overwhelmingly, it's older folks who are excited about generational change because you have been on the front lines for so long fighting for these changes, and we are moving backwards. And I would be pissed off. All the amount of time and work and sweat that you've put in to enact these great changes that we've seen in the last decades, and we're moving backwards. And overwhelmingly, I think we need younger people who are upset with the system, who know that, we can't participate in this corruption, this insider trading, this lobbying. We want real change. And what we've seen actually is that younger folks don't really identify or less identifying with a party. They're not necessarily Democrat or Republican. They've kind of flip-flopped in the last few elections. And what that tells me is, and what I've heard, is that they don't really care about the party politics. They want a candidate who can speak to them as a human being, who isn't that robot politician who just uses their speaking points or if you ever reached out to Glenn Groth and get your automated email response to your questions. And we're seeing that. I mean, if you look across the country, we have younger candidates running in districts, primarying older folks who, have just been in their position of power for so long but haven't actually done anything with it. And so I'm always encouraged by young people running. When I was in local government, it was always my goal to get more young people to run because we have different perspectives. We know what the future holds for us, and we want to be the ones who are guiding our country to that future and not just having to live in one that is decided by people like Glenn Grothman who aren't going to be around to see the decisions impacting them. One issue specifically that I think that we aren't talking about enough is AI, data centers in general, and I don't think someone like Glenn Grothman understands or even has the foresight of where this is going, where we are headed in a future of AI, and that's why we have been so reactive as opposed to proactive. And so we need people who understand the state of the world and where we're headed to make these decisions. And so yeah, we need more young people running for office. I'm very proud to be the youngest candidate. And I always push back about you're too young because I am the youngest candidate, but I'm the only one who's actually been elected before. And so I have experience. I've run for office. I've been in these rooms where we make decisions, where we go line by line in the budget and decide what's being cut, where we're adding funds to. And a budget isn't just of how we spend your taxes, but it's a book of our values. It's where we want our funds to go, how we help our community. And so we need folks who have those different perspectives. It's not just that I'm young, but coming from that working class background, living those experiences that many people in Congress have not. And Glenn Grothman is out of touch with our current, the state of the world and our constituents. So yeah, we need more young people.
As you mentioned, you have very detailed policy goals on your website. Could you go into detail on, maybe hit the bullet points of your healthcare plan that you have on your website?
Yeah. So one of my, I would say, top priorities is healthcare, but there's many ways we can address it. And when you ask the candidates, what you want to do with healthcare, it's usually the same line of, we want to lower costs, we want to expand access, and we want to do that. But how we do that can be done in many ways. My end goal would be Medicare for all, but I know that's not going to happen overnight. So I would champion a public option to compete against the private industry that we have now as a bridge to get to Medicare for all, because we know that's kind of where we're heading by expanding access, by putting more funding into Medicare and Medicaid. We're going to get to a point where it's not sustainable and we need a new plan. And so if you go on my website, so I have two separate pages. One is healthcare in general. So I talk about a number of other issues like maternal health, prescription drugs, our aging population and how we address that, childcare. But I have a specific other page just for my Medicare plan, and it's called Medicare for All, Wojo's version. And I go into great detail about what this plan is, what it is, providing vision, dental, and basic health care for everyone, regardless of your age, income. If you are a citizen, you have access to those resources. But it's not just enough to, talk about a plan that we have. We need to, one, talk about how we're actually going to get it passed, how it's going to come to fruition, and the question that we always get is how we're going to pay for it. And so I'm not going to go into all the great detailed numbers of it. If you're interested, you can read that. But within my plan, I break down exactly how we get to that. We're spending about roughly $2 trillion right now on the current American healthcare system. Rough estimates of a Medicare for All plan would be about $4 trillion. That's kind of a conservative estimate. And so how do we fill that $2 trillion gap? And so I go into detail. There's a number of ways we do that. We create new sources of revenue. One of the ideas I had is legalizing and taxing marijuana because we know it's already happening in this country, but it's very patchworky right now. So we need it at the federal level and using that towards our healthcare plan. A number of other options include cutting waste. People always joke that Democrats just love to tax and spend. I've lowered taxes in my time in local government without having to take a chainsaw to our budgets and our departments. But there definitely is waste, and we all recognize that. We need to cut waste, whether that is in the overbloated Pentagon, whether it's clawing back that money that was given to ICE, reversing the OBBBA and those tax cuts for the rich. But it's new taxes on things like capital gains, on stock buybacks where corporations and wealthy folks overwhelmingly are benefiting from the current systems in place. And so when you look at my plan and you can go line by line and see each revenue of how we raise that money, I go into great detail about it. We can reach that amount of money and we can provide folks with health care without worrying about if they're going to break the bank, without having to cut prescription drugs in half because they can't afford to get more. And so, so it goes into great detail. I'd encourage you to read it. It's a couple pages long. And like I said, I know it's not something that's going to happen overnight. I actually talk about how we work with Republicans to get it passed. Part of that is making sure that it is solely focused on American citizens. So I know there would be a lot of pushback against waste and fraud, or how we're making sure that it's actually getting to the people who need it. I address that. One of the things I address at the end too is how we can include AI, because we know it's going to be a part of our society whether we want it to or not, and there are many bad things that we're not addressing with it, but there are many opportunities that we can use to help lower costs, to help increase access, especially for folks in rural areas where they don't have a hospital or a clinic readily available for them to access, especially here in the 6th District where rural hospitals have been closing down. We need more options for people to connect with healthcare specialists. I do admit in that plan, and I'm not going to lie to you, that we will have to raise taxes a bit for everyone. But when you look at the end result, people are saving money because of just all of the, the junk that we have right now, the overburdened bureaucratic systems in our current healthcare system, that increased prices. So despite us having to raise taxes on everyone slightly, more so on the higher end of income, definitely, that folks would be saving about $1,500 to $2,000 a year, according to my plan. And when we talk about taxes, we all know no one likes to pay taxes if they don't have to, but if they're going towards things that we value, healthcare, roads, education, people are willing to pay a little more. if they know they're going to get good services. But my plan does raise taxes slightly, but at the end, people are saving a lot more because our healthcare system is more efficient and not loaded like it is now.
So a critique of the Democratic Party is that they are weak and ineffective. And I would probably attribute it to the Democratic Party having goals like Medicare for All. I think it's a good goal, but we screamed this for years and years, yet we aren't able to achieve it. The only way we were capable of getting the current ACA that we have was because we had a supermajority in the Senate in 2009. What are your thoughts on that? Like, using this as more of like a selling point. Like, this is what we want, but then not actually following through.
Yeah. So I think one of the deeper issues with what is happening, and to address this point, what's happening in Congress right now, and this happens on both sides, that the level of corruption and money that influences our policies and our decision making is the reason why we can't get a lot of things done. If you are a representative who, like Lynn Grothman, is receiving money from the insurance industry to fund your campaign, then of course you're not going to fight for something that would take them out of the healthcare process. And so one of the first policies I published on my website and publicly was what I call my Clean Congress Act. And it's a couple of items that, one, bans insider trading by members of Congress and their immediate family members, because right now that's also a loophole that they get through. One of them is ending the revolving door of allowing politicians, after they leave office, to immediately become a lobbyist, so they're right back in the mix, influencing these decisions and having that insider knowledge. One of them is updating our current gift-giving rules for members of Congress, because right now it's very vague. And they can kind of just be giving gifts under the table to influence their decisions. The last one is banning corporate PACs from being able to donate to candidates, because as we've seen, especially here in Wisconsin, and we can look back at the last Supreme Court race where Elon Musk poured in millions of dollars to influence a decision in our state, despite having no connection to Wisconsin. But this is happening all across our country. At the local, state, and federal level, and so before we can even address a lot of these issues, we need to clean Congress. I think the second part of that is the establishment of both Republicans and Democrats who have been in office for so long that they don't really feel like they need to respond to their constituents, because again, they have money, they have influence and power, and they don't really need to respond to the critiques that are being given. So one of this comes with electing young people younger people or more progressive folks who actually want to get these things accomplished. I mean, I give New York as a great example of Zoran Mamdani, who was elected on a working class first platform. But he also understands that his plans won't happen without accumulating power, without working with folks to get these things done, working with the governor to get free childcare for all of New Yorkers. And so I would say we need to be loud against these establishment politicians who are holding us back from policies like Medicare for All, or raising the minimum wage, protecting our unions, etc. We need to be louder and more vocal about it, and we need to start building coalitions within the party. And I think we're already seeing that in the Democratic side. Folks like AOC or folks like Maxwell, Frost from Florida. Just younger folks who are not beholden to that type of politicking, who will work with folks on the other side. With the Epstein files, that wouldn't have happened without bipartisan support, without legislators from both the Republican side and the Democratic side coming together and saying, we need to vote on this together, otherwise it's not going to happen. And so I've always said I'll work with anyone who wants to move our country forward, who will help our state and this district specifically. And I've done that. I have a record of working with folks who have very differing views than I do. And I've gotten things done in local government because of that. So I recognize that we can't do this alone. It's going to take working with independents and Republicans to get our agenda passed.
Can you give an example of where you worked across the aisle, a specific example?
Yeah. So when I was on the county board, again, I was very young at the time, but one of our members, he was very right-wing. Like, he's the guy who would drive around and his car was completely covered in MAGA stickers and, you name it. And we worked together to pass a resolution that was calling on the state to ban conversion therapy in Wisconsin. And so, if you don't know what conversion therapy is, it's outdated, archaic practice that basically says that you can be forced to change your sexual orientation. We know it, all medical professionals know it doesn't work. And so I worked with him, and it was funny because he's like, this is a thing? I didn't even know this was happening in our state. And Republicans at the state legislature, the state level, won't pursue that, despite calls from Democrats and many other people, medical professionals, from doing that. He was my co-sponsor, and we got it passed because he was vocal and he got kind of the folks on the other side. So I was able to work with someone far more right ideology, someone who probably, if we were at the state level, wouldn't have voted for it, but because I sat down and said, this is what's happening. Children are being hurt and abused by these practices, and we need to end it. And there was a clinic in Winnebago County that was practicing that and doing that, and that's why we originally brought it up, because we had families reaching out to us to respond to that. One other example, when I was on the city council, I mentioned earlier that we were able to lower the fine for possession of marijuana. Most of that has to be done at the state level, but what we could do at the local level was like first-time possession. And so when I proposed it, I got so much flack from one of our members on the council. Like, you could probably go back and look at one of the meetings, but he was yelling at me basically like, how dare you do this? This is wrong. And I wanted to lower it to the legal level that we could have, which would have been $1. We couldn't make it $0, but we legally could have at least made it $1. I think it was almost like $400 in Oshkosh. Meanwhile, open intoxicant was like $40. And so I wanted to lower it to $1. A majority of the members on the council weren't comfortable with that. They said, I kind of agree with what you're saying, but I think lowering it to that amount is too low. And so I could have said, all right, we're just going to not do this at all. I could have scrapped the whole plan. But I worked with my colleagues to lower it, and we got it down to $35. That was the compromise we made. So I'm always willing to make compromises with folks if I know that at the end the results will still be positive. And so again, those are, I would say, the qualities I think we need right now in our leaders. Yeah.
Do you have a plan to prevent Trump from stealing our elections? Or a plan to do, if he succeeds, what are you going to do? There is a coalition in Wisconsin called Fighting Oligarchy that could give you some ideas.
Yeah. Well, first, I think that the president should be impeached. I am endorsed by, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's a new group at the federal level, Citizens Impeachment, where they are working with candidates who have made the pledge that we will prioritize impeaching Trump for, there's a number of things that he's done, enriching his family, lying under oath, and really just consolidating power. But I would start at least there. I know it probably is unlikely to happen unless Democrats retake the House. Step one, I would be taking office January after the election if I win. And so if we retake the House, I will be very strong against allowing any of his agenda to get passed. That's just what we need to do. Democrats need to stand strong and hold the line against these policies like the SAVE Act, or whatever other, I know Steele and our other congressman has, I think it was Make Elections Great Again Act. So we need to be informing people about this, because I don't think a lot of people understand right now what a policy like the SAVE Act will do. And they won't understand until it's too late, and then they go to the ballot box and it's like, well, you don't follow these new guidelines because you weren't informed by your representative. And so I think part of it is coalition building too, working with these different organizations and groups. I know we have a number of Oshkosh groups who are not affiliated necessarily with a party, but they understand what's at stake. And so working with these groups to advocate and lobby our other congresspeople, because I'm only one, and I can't do everything by myself. So I need to build coalitions with the various members to make sure that we're stopping these policies from getting through. And if we're in the House and Democrats are in control, I'll be very strong in my opposition against the Trump administration. I mean, we won't let anything get passed, and certainly we won't allow people like Kristi Noem to be elected to these other positions in these departments that are literally killing Americans right now. Yeah.
I want to follow up on Gabe's first question about generational change that people are expecting. I think one of the things you could do as far as opening your presentations to different constituents is that to talk about Glenn Grothman back in 2014 when he first ran for Congress, he pledged he was not going to do more than 5 terms. So he's at the end of that. So I think hold him accountable for that pledge. Tell him you're not walking your talk, and then get into some of the issues where you can give examples why he's not walking his talk as far as Congress is concerned. And you've done some already with what you spoke. But I would like to have you talk, and it's really not on this, is what do you believe needs to be done as far as protecting women's rights in this country?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And actually, yeah, you're correct. I think even before I announced that I was running for this position, that was one of the things that I had saw, that he made a pledge that he would only run a total of 5 terms, and now he's running for a 7th term. So again, that shows that someone like Glenn Grothman has become completely reliant on government. I mean, and he's been in office for the last 30 years, not just, I mean, he served 12 years in Congress, but he's been in total office and elected office for 30 years. And so he hasn't worked an actual job outside of politics for the last 30 years. And I think that's why he's so out of touch with regular working people. He doesn't understand, our needs. He has his government-funded health insurance, his pension that he'll have after he leaves. And so I think that's a great contrast that I always bring up when I'm talking to folks in person, that, listen, like I work a 9-to-5 job, 40 hours a week. I understand what the average person is going through. Someone like Glenn Grothman, who, loves to talk about, loves to criticize welfare, but is basically on political welfare at this point, to fund his, lavish lifestyle now. But he's not, and he's also not visible. So we don't even know half the time that he exists because he's not around. But to your second point, on my website, and I'll always be very vocal that I will always support a woman's right to choose what is best for her health, what is best for her body, and what's best for her in general, because I'm not the one who needs to be legislating what women can and can't do in this country. I think we need to codify Roe v. Wade and a woman's ability to get an abortion if she so desires, but that needs to be done at the legislative level. We can't no longer rely on the courts to make those decisions and be consistent, as we've seen, especially with courts becoming much more political. And so I would work with our legislators, especially if we take the House, to make sure that that is in our law and that it is not easy to undo if we then lose power again. Right now that fight is happening in Wisconsin too, and so if we can't do it at the federal level, I would use my influence and my power at the federal level to make sure that we're getting it done at least at the state level, lobbying our state legislators and whoever our governor is at the time to get that passed. But that's on my website, and I will always stand with women and make sure that they have a right to decide what to do with their body. That shouldn't be a controversial thing. And Glenn Grothman does not hold that view, and never will. And I hope that women, whether they are on the left side or the right side, can recognize that someone like him should not be legislating your body.
Although it shouldn't be a controversial thing in your opinion, it is a controversial thing. And you also mentioned impeaching Trump. Stances like that, being in the congressional district that we are, it's very heavily red. Are you worried that you may lose potential voters?
Sure, but I think those people probably weren't going to vote for me anyways. And so I'm focused on the people that aren't so entrenched like I said, they probably weren't going to vote for me in the first place. They probably were going to say that, oh, well, now I'm not going to vote for you because of that. But I think where we reach voters is talking about these real issues that affect their everyday lives. I intentionally made, when you look at my issues and you can see all of them, intentionally affordability in the economy is the top because I know that is what is impacting people the most right now. And so when we talk to folks about these issues, we can have disagreements there. And for some of those folks, that might be the issue that is their deciding factor. And I actually had someone reach out to me on social media, and he said to me, he was like, I really like a lot of what you stand for. I like that you don't take corporate PAC money, and he specifically mentioned abortion. And he's like, but I am pro-life, and I think that if you kind of talked to that more, took that stance, that you would get more voters. And basically what I said was, I respect if that is where you stand on the issue, if that is the decision that you are making for yourself, I will not push back against that or criticize you for that. But it is not my job to legislate a woman's body or to decide what they can and can't do. And so if that loses me voters, then I'm okay with that, because I at least know that I'm standing for my values and for the values that many people hold. But I'm going to treat people with respect. And that's, I think, what it comes down to is, because it's a very contentious issue for some people, and it can lead to, heated dialogue when we're talking about an intimate issue like that. So I always give people grace when we're talking about these issues, that yes, I know this is personal for you, and you might disagree with me, and I respect that you have a differing view, but this is where I stand, and this is why I stand on that issue. And we might not see eye to eye, but I'm still going to give you the time of day to explain why you believe what you believe and why I believe what I believe.
Well, first of all, Aaron, I want to say thank you for your visibility. As far as I can remember, this is at least the 6th time in Sheboygan County, in the past 9 months or a year or so. So thank you for that. My question is about your healthcare policy. Could you speak to some of your policy stances specifically on mental health? I'm a therapist, and knowing that the people in this community have access to affordable, quality mental health care is important. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah. Funding is really important aspect of that. When I kind of first announced, when the discussions about the OBBBA were first being discussed, and the cuts to healthcare, there is a organization, the ARC, Fond du Lac, and they are a organization that helps folks who have, mental health issues, disabilities, who need resources like getting a job or having affordable housing, having a credit to help them actually afford. And they had released a statement basically saying, if this funding gets cut, we might have to shut down because they rely heavily on that funding. And so I immediately saw that, I reached out to them and I said, hey, I'd like to come tour your facility and meet with you. I'm at this point a nobody, I'm not your representative, but I'm hoping to be, but I want to hear directly from you why this is going to impact you. And what I learned was about 70% of their funding comes from federal funds that would vanish if the OBBA passed. And unfortunately it did, and so right now they're in a spot where they are kind of struggling right now. And what that ends up doing is it falls on the people they take care of, folks who will fall through the cracks, who, if they don't have these resources, a home that's provided to them, job training, that they could reoffend, they could be sent to jail, and then that amount of money just ends up getting put on the taxpayers anyways, because we're paying for the prisons and the jails. And so I think part of it is meeting with these groups to actually learn about the services they provide and how important they are, because these are human beings who rely on these services to get a job, to have secure housing, to not fall through the cracks, because we know that the amount of funding that goes towards mental health services right now is not sufficient enough, especially here in Wisconsin and in this district, where if you live in a rural area, you probably have an hour or two just to get to a clinic or a facility to get the care that you need. And so part of my plan talks about investing in things like mental health services. And so I'll just read basically right what I put on my website, that 1 in 5 youth especially face mental health challenges, yet access lags, especially in rural areas, with only 20% of needs met statewide, which is criminally low. But one of the things that I put in there is that I would work to invest $300 million in-school-based mental health, including counselors, crisis lines, and telehealth for those rural areas where they don't have immediate access to someone, so that way they can reach out to specialists, especially if they're in a moment of crisis or they need, someone to take care of them. And so, building on Governor Evers' 2025 Year of the Kid initiatives and addressing especially the workforce vacancies right now that we're seeing in the healthcare industry. So we need incentives in many of these rural areas for workforce development and for building more hospitals in general. And so there's a number of issues, I know, especially that tie into just healthcare, the cost of mental health services in general would be addressed in my Medicare for All plan or in a public option. But a lot of it comes down to just us being able to secure enough funding to go to these specific areas. And so my role as a representative would be securing that funding, but working with state legislators, working with the governor to make sure that that funding is going to the areas that need it the most. Because it's not enough to just say, we're going to get you this money, but where is it actually going towards and how is it being used? And so my role would kind of be that bridge between the federal agencies and the state government to make sure that that funding is going to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about some economic issues to run on that. You talked some about social issues, which obviously have costs involved.
Yeah.
And the costs would go across the spectrum, with the working class catching a good chunk of it. Now, what can you do as part of a assumed democratic house to try to help balance that, to get more benefits for the working class people and possibly to temper the 1%?
Yeah. So, thank you for that question. Again, as I've said, my economy issues are what I address forefront because I know that affordability is on everyone's mind right now, and it's what is impacting your everyday life. And so some of the issues that I talk about, raising the minimum wage, we know it's $7.25 is just not sufficient enough for folks, and we need to have accountability in that mark. I know a lot of jobs have been raising the wages, but we need the government to step up and say, okay, we need a better baseline than what we have now. One of the issues I talk about in depth is how corporations right now who are paying less than $15 an hour, many of their workers, millions of workers, rely on federal welfare programs because they're not being paid enough. These are folks who are working full-time jobs and still have to rely on welfare programs just to afford basic necessities. So something I would like to see is disincentivizing that, is holding these corporations accountable for, hey, if you have workers who are on welfare programs because you're not paying them enough, you're not getting tax cuts, you're not getting tax credits when your workers can't, afford basic necessities. So I talk about that a lot. I spend a lot of time talking about our support of unions and labor and how many of the various fights that they're going through right now, because we know that labor unions are the working class, and when they are thriving, everyone gets lifted up. And so, defending prevailing wages, opposing worker misclassifications, making sure that their retirement plans are actually secure and can't just change at the whim of politicians, protecting those benefits, allowing people to collectively bargain for better wages and better working conditions. I talk about how we need to start preparing for the displacement of workers as a result of AI and how we are going to retrain the workforce if their job is taken because of AI. So making sure that we have tax credits and incentives. To your question, people, that's the question. People always say, how are we going to pay for all these things? We have enough money to pay for these things. It is just that the current people in charge are not prioritizing these issues. I mean, we have already spent over $5 billion in this war with Iran. That's $5 billion that could go towards tax credits for people who need to, get job retraining. That is money that could go into green infrastructure to build, to provide good wage-paying jobs and build up our roads, build up our infrastructure, our energy. That could go towards lowering the costs of energy. I talk about data centers and how they need to be held accountable for the increase in energy prices that result from the many data centers that we're seeing in Wisconsin. But there needs to be action at the federal level too. I know there's a lot of talk of our state regulating that, but I think we need to see that across the board and have at least a base standard of how data centers are regulated in our country, because right now there's little to nothing and they can kind of do what they want. Again, I go back to making sure that we hold corporations accountable by not allowing them to fund our elections and making sure that they're not influencing politicians. I talk about a tax on stock buybacks that help corporations retain a lot of their wealth. I'd like to see some type of wealth tax. I think we've seen something being floated around. I'm not completely set on a specific number, but overwhelmingly we are seeing that people support raising the taxes on the 1% of the 1%. Folks who, yes, can create jobs for our economy, but are overwhelmingly using loopholes to not pay their fair share of taxes. And so part of it is reorganizing how we tax the wealthiest in this country, but also it's always, like I said, a priority of our budget. And so, like I said, when I was on council and when I was on the county board and we had our budget session every year, it was a reflection of our values. We decided where these tax dollars were going, not to, cut taxes for the rich, but to make sure that our health clinics had the funding that they needed, to make sure that our sanitation division had the funding so they could keep our roads clean and pick up the garbage. And so, again, I encourage you to look at my website. I go much more in depth on there on many of these issues. But again, I think it's just a matter of where we're putting our funding and not sending it overseas to wars that are just going to raise the prices and hurt us even further.
I was just going to ask a question about what you could do if you were to be elected to take there's such a disproportionate burden on, let's say, Social Security, what middle class and lower class people, lower income people pay in to Social Security. And the wealthy they don't have that income where it's withdrawn, and so therefore, trillionaires or billionaires paying the same rate that somebody, a middle class person is. Same way with the income tax brackets. So I really agree with what you're saying, but I haven't necessarily heard concrete ways of approaching that we can understand and that would actually get passed.
Yeah, I think, and part of it too is I always preface that I don't want to overpromise the things I want to do because I am realistic that if I am elected, we will have a split Congress. We'll have a Republican president who will probably likely veto or prevent a lot of these things from happening. And so, whether we're in the majority or the minority, I think part of it comes with organizing, with these groups, with these organizations, with these unions, to get this legislation passed. And I don't have a specific plan with that right now. I can tell you that, yes, I will support anything to protect Social Security and to make sure that funds don't run out with an overwhelmingly aging population in general. But that as part of my job, and I always say I don't know everything, and I don't claim to know everything. So I think at least for my first few months in Congress would be meeting with these various organizations to see, what are the policies you're fighting for to protect Social Security, to address many of these issues, and to see what plans they have in place to see what works. Because quite frankly, I don't know what the correct policy is right now at this moment to fix Social Security or to make sure that it doesn't run out. But what I will say is that I will work with these organizations to see what the work they're doing and to help uplift them because they've been in the fight doing this for the last number of years. So I'm sorry I don't have an exact answer or policy for your question. But what I will promise is that I'll work with these folks to make sure that we pass something to protect Social Security from running dry.
I think a big issue in the 60D is the issue of documented immigrants. I attended a session yesterday with the candidate Taylor for Supreme Court, and there was a question about somebody not understanding how all these farmers in the 60D are voting red, when it's pretty significant in terms of what could happen if they lose some of their employees because of what's going on now in our state. In fact, somebody gave me an example of a large farm near Kiel, Wisconsin. They have 30 immigrants working full-time on that farm. One of the big farms, you know, and they're employed, I assume legally. What can we do about the immigration problem that's going on right now where we're trying to deport everybody?
Yeah, I think immigration is huge right now, and kind of in twofold, where I stand. Of course, I believe that we need to make sure that our border is secure. We want to prevent, the flow of drugs that can kill people from coming into this country. We want to prevent, criminals from getting to this country. But we can do that, with dignity, with empathy, with respect. That's not happening. We don't need roving bands of people going through our communities, ripping people out of their houses, showing up to their jobs and arresting them, or in many cases going to their immigration hearings and snatching them. People who are following the legal process to become a citizen are being snatched off, as they're following the process. Here in Wisconsin, there is a large portion, especially in this district, of immigrant workers. Sometime last year during the summer, I went to a farm in Manitowoc. They did this Twilight Farm meeting where people in the community, there were stakeholders, other farmers. We basically all came together to discuss what's happening. We got a tour of the farm, and one of the questions that came up was, the immigrant workforce. And I think this is, the way that the current administration describes it is that every immigrant is pretty much the exact same. And they don't talk about the various visas that we have in this country, the worker permits that allow many of these farm workers to come here and work legally. The way it's described at the federal level by the Trump administration is basically that if they're an immigrant or they're here on a visa, they're bad or they're illegal and they should be deported. And we know that's not the case. We know that immigrant workers are the current reason right now for a lot of our farms that they're able to operate. But my immigration policy focuses on a pathway to citizenship. I think that if you are working in this country, you haven't committed any crimes, you're just trying to better your life, that you should have an expedited way, pathway to citizenship. Because we know that once you are a citizen, you have measures of accountability. We can make sure that you're not being taken advantage by your job, or that you have recourse if something goes wrong. You have the ability to connect with law enforcement if something's going wrong. They're paying taxes into our system then at that case, so then we have more funding to fund these programs that I've been talking about. And so I like to see a pathway to citizenship. I've been very vocal about abolishing ICE. I think at this point, the department is just too far gone to be recovered. We do need immigration enforcement, of course. We saw that under every other president. I mean, they called Obama the deporter-in-chief because he deported a large amount of people. So we can make sure that our streets are safe, that people are following the law, but we don't do that by sending militias into our communities, by gunning down Americans for, utilizing their right to protest. So I would say secure border, make sure that they have the funding to actually, have the technology and the resources and the personnel, but we need a pathway to citizenship for the many undocumented people, for our dreamers, for our folks who are here to get a better education, to start their lives.
Just a comment follow-up. Glenn Grothman has visited the southern border more than he comes here for our request to visit us in Sheboygan Co.
All right, closing thoughts. All right, thank you so much again for having me. I thank you for the questions. As you've seen, I want to be clear that, I don't have the answers to everything. I think it's fine that our leaders admit that, because far too many people in power right now act as if they have all the answers and that they know what's best for our country. I've always led by leading with community, leading with our other leaders, and working with organizations to make sure that we have the best policies in place for our community. And so, as your next congressman, if I'm elected, I will work with you. I'll have these open dialogue meetings. One of the pledges I made is that I would have an in-person town hall every month if elected. And I'm not waiting to get elected, because I've already been holding in-person town halls and meeting with folks, because I want to hear what's happening in your lives, what we can do, what I could do as your leader to better your lives. And so, thank you so much for your questions. I really appreciate it. I know Glenn Grothman isn't going to be in anything like this. I doubt he will agree to a debate or a forum, But that's not going to stop me from calling out his bad behavior and how we can move our country forward. So if you are interested in being a part of this campaign, I'd encourage you to go to wojoforcongress.com to learn more about my background, the issues that we've talked about more in depth, and just how you can get involved with this campaign. And we're going to win this thing, and we're going to fire Glenn Grossman in November.
All right, and now, candidate for Wisconsin Governor, State Senator Kelda Roys.
Thank you, Gabe, and I'm delighted to be back here in Sheboygan County. I feel like I was just here, but actually everywhere I go in Wisconsin, I'm like, I was just here. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Kelda Roys, and I'm running for governor for two very important reasons. First, we are living in a very dangerous period in American history. We have an authoritarian regime in Washington that is shredding our Constitution. They are undermining the rule of law. They have unleashed a violent paramilitary force against us in our communities, and we need a governor with a spine of steel who will use every tool at her disposal to protect us from the many harms of this Republican regime and to do her best to try to bring our democracy back from the brink. Secondly, and this is a more hopeful note, those of us that have been in rooms like this over the last 16 years know that for about a generation, Wisconsin's been a pretty tough place to be a Democrat. And that's because we've had the most gerrymandered legislature in the history of the country. But that is coming to an end. And so now looking forward, we need a governor who won't just veto bad legislation, but we have a small window of opportunity in 2027 after we flip the state Senate Democratic, and with an assembly that is going to be very, very close one way or the other, we could actually get something done in the state. If we have a governor with the experience, the knowledge, the skill, and of course, the commitment to make progressive change. Those are the reasons why I'm running for governor. So for those of you who don't know me, I'll give you a little Kelda Roys 101. I was born in Marshfield, Wisconsin. I spent my early years in rural Taylor County, where my family lived in a one-room schoolhouse and I had a pet goat. Our closest neighbors were Amish, and for those of you who are not familiar, this is Wisconsin. Medford is roughly there, and we lived outside of Medford, north of Highway 29. My family later moved to Madison, where I graduated from high school. I went to the University of Wisconsin Law School, where I worked on the Wisconsin Innocence Project. So if anybody's curious about my thoughts on criminal justice reform, we can set aside another 5 hours to talk about my detailed plans for how we can fix our state and be focused on public safety. And then after law school, I didn't do what a lot of my classmates did, go work for a big law firm and make a lot of money. Instead, I became the executive director of NARAL Pro-Choice Wisconsin. I spent 4 years traveling this state, building progressive power, and working to expand access not just to abortion, but to contraception and sex education, to bring down our state's shameful infant mortality rate. And that's work that I have continued throughout my career. I also helped to pass the first pro-choice law in a generation in Wisconsin, the Compassionate Care for Rape Victims Act. And when I say I know how to get really difficult progressive things done in tough legislative environments, I want to let you know that we passed that legislation when we had a Democratic Senate and an anti-choice Republican Assembly. So I do know what I'm talking about. And I've been doing this for 20 years. I then ran for the state assembly kind of unexpectedly. I was the underdog candidate, but I knocked on 20,252 doors and won that primary and came in 2009, which was the last time Democrats had the trifecta. I was so excited because, of course, there was so much that we wanted to do. I became vice chair of the health committee, and we helped expand Badger Care to 80,000 previously uninsured Wisconsinites. So while a lot of candidates talk about, oh, I'm going to expand health care, I've actually done it. I've helped to do it. And that was the last time we expanded Badger Care in this state. We left a lot undone in that session. And that's one of the things that haunts me and drives me in this campaign, because I know how fleeting it can be to have the opportunity to make change. And I am determined that we will not waste the opportunity that we are about to have next year. We all know what happened in the next election after 2009, right? Scott Walker came in and we went from a completely blue state to a completely red state. And the first thing he did was to attack teachers and nurses and our public schools and our universities. And then he went after private sector workers. And you know what? Our economy has never recovered from the money that was taken out of families' pocketbooks over that time. So one of the things I'm committed to doing as governor is raising wages, both the minimum wage and repealing Act 10 and restoring collective bargaining rights for all workers in this state. Everyone should Now in 2013, I left the state legislature and I went on to start my own small business. It's a tech-enabled real estate company that makes it easier and more affordable to sell a house or buy a house. And I'm very passionate about expanding access to housing and have a lot of detailed thoughts about that. But I'm also passionate about small businesses and making it possible for any Wisconsinite who, like me, has an idea or a dream, has a strong work ethic, and that little bit of crazy that you need if you're going to start your own small business, or run for office for that matter, that they can actually do that in Wisconsin. And I've worked as a legislator and as a small business advocate to try to make Wisconsin a place where people can start a small business and thrive. And by decoupling some of the core benefits that people need, like paid family leave, health care, access to a secure retirement, decoupling that from employment, we can actually unleash a lot of economic growth and potential in our state by making it possible for people to start small businesses. Now, in 2020, I was elected to the state senate where I now serve, and I work on the Joint Finance Committee, which is the committee that writes the state budget. Now, this is important because I'm the only candidate running for governor that actually does have deep knowledge about the state budget from having worked on it. I know where the Republicans are hiding our money. And I also know where it needs to go. Namely, it needs to go into our public schools. Our public schools that have been starved of resources for 30 of the last 32 years. And also to our local governments, who are trying mightily to provide a high level of service in the midst of declining state funding. I'd love to talk a little bit more about public education because I really view it as our core constitutional responsibility at the state level. I was actually sued a few weeks ago in my role as a member of the Joint Committee on Finance because education advocates, parents, teachers, and school districts recognize that our schools have been so underfunded for so many years that we are now failing to provide the quality free public education that is a guarantee, a birthright of every child in our Constitution. And so I welcome this lawsuit because I think we're right. Our kids deserve better. You know, my parents chose to be in Wisconsin coming from other places because they knew as a family of pretty modest means that their kids could have a good life because of Wisconsin's high quality public education system. And we did. You know, first in rural northern Wisconsin, great public schools, and then later in Madison. And I worry that kids today are not getting the same quality of education. Our teachers are overworked, they are underpaid, they do not have the resources and support that they need. And we can see that in the offerings that our school districts are able to create, and we can see that in the outcomes. So as governor, I will be focused on education from early childhood to K-12 public education to our great public higher educational institutions. Wisconsin will be the education state once again when I'm governor. And I want to talk a little bit about where that money is going instead of our public schools. Certainly a lot of it is going to tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires and big corporations. We know that that is true. But another big piece of it is money that is going to private, unaccountable voucher schemes. These are private schools that do not meet the same standards that our public schools are required to. Many of them are religious in nature, and they are free to discriminate against teachers and students, even though they get public money. I am the candidate in this race that has a responsible plan to bring this failed voucher experiment to an end and make sure that that money goes into our public schools instead. A couple of other issues that I think are really important in this race. Obviously, cost of living. And the big ticket items really are healthcare, housing, childcare, and utilities. And I have detailed plans on my website to bring down the cost of all of these items. If you have to put my campaign on a bumper sticker, you can say, Kelda Roys is going to raise wages, lower costs, and protect our freedoms. Because those are the things that are really at stake here. I want to mention just a little bit about myself personally. I'm the mom and stepmom of 5 kids. I know, it's a lot. I always get a kind of a shocked response. I'm 46, and my 2 oldest stepdaughters are now in their 20s. They've turned out beautifully. We're still working on our 12, 8, 4-year-olds. But I'm deeply committed to this state being a place where every single person can thrive. It shouldn't matter who you are or where you're from or what you look like. Every single Wisconsinite deserves a great public education for their kids. They deserve to make enough money to be able to support themselves if they are working full-time. They deserve access to affordable, quality health care, like my plan to open up the state health insurance that I enjoy as a state employee to let anybody buy in. These are the basics. But we want Wisconsin to be more than just a place where you can get by, and a place that you can really, really thrive. I am confident that we can do that if we have a governor who knows how and is willing to use political power to get things done to help people. Our Republican opponents never hesitate for a minute to use and abuse their power. But they do it to hurt people, to divide and conquer, to take rights away, to destroy our rights and undermine our Constitution. We need Democrats to stop being so shy about using power. When it comes to being willing to throw a punch or take a punch for the children, as Nancy Pelosi said, I am that person. And that's why I'm the best candidate to be governor, and I ask for your votes on August 3rd and August 11th and November 3rd. Thank
You mentioned that private schools aren't meeting the same standards as public schools. Can you go into more detail about those standards, please?
Yeah, so specifically voucher schools. So if you're a public school, number one, you have to take every student. You don't get to cherry pick and say, well, we like you, but we're not sure about you. And let's try you out for a month and then decide we don't like you, but we're going to keep the money that comes along with you. That's what voucher schools do. Voucher schools can discriminate against a teacher because she's pregnant and unmarried, or because he's the wrong religion or gay, or a student because they have a disability, and I think that's outrageous. Public money should be for public schools, period. Yes. But here's my plan to responsibly address this voucher scheme. The first step is you require the same standards. So your teachers have to be licensed. You can't just hire some rando off the street without a background check. Your kids have to meet the same academic standards. They have to take the forward exam so we actually know how they're performing. And you can't discriminate. You're not allowed to cherry pick either, students or staff. And I think that alone is going to render a lot of the current schools that are receiving voucher money to just say no. We'd rather be able to continue running our schools the way we want to, and we're going to just say no. The second step is we have to treat Milwaukee and Racine and their voucher programs differently from the rest of the state. And that's because they are far more entrenched. They have been in operation for longer, and they serve a much higher percentage of students in those districts than the statewide expansion. The statewide expansion is relatively new, and what we know is that the vast majority of students that are receiving these vouchers were already in private school before the state started picking up the tab. So we say, first we require the same standards, non-discrimination, transparency, accountability. And then we're going to say, starting at the beginning of next school year, the state is no longer going to pay the cost of these vouchers in this statewide expansion area. And parents can choose if they want to move their kid to the public school, or if they want to do what they were doing before and just continue paying out of pocket as they had previously been. Now for Milwaukee and Racine, as I mentioned, it is more complicated. And I do not think, at the end of the day, we have to do right by kids. And if kids are in an environment where they are thriving. I don't think it's right to take them out of that. Many of the students in those voucher schools, the public schools just do not have the capacity to handle that right away. So we need to set a date certain and say, after this date, we will not accept new students into the voucher program. However, we will continue to allow anyone who's currently enrolled to be able to complete their education. And over time, then you can help the public schools build their capacity so that they can accept more students. And we're also going to give any voucher school that wants to the opportunity to become a public charter school, right? They can certainly apply to the school board to become a public charter, but then obviously they're going to have to meet the same standards, right, as public schools. So to me, that is the responsible way to address this while respecting the fact that public dollars need to be reserved for our public schools. Yes.
I'd like to know how in the world the reimbursement for special education and the per pupil funding aid are more for private voucher school students, a lot more than they are for our public school students. I don't understand how that's legal or how it's constitutional. I just don't understand.
Well, I think it's outrageous, and it's happened in recent years. We've had 8 Republican budgets in a row, and our kids cannot afford another Republican budget. Now, I have seen this up close and personal, and the Governor Evers writes pretty good budgets. His budgets have a lot of great ideas in them, and then the Republicans get a hold of it, and they just put it right into the garbage. They don't even recycle it. They just literally put it in the trash. And Republicans do whatever they want in the budget. And the thing that has been the most consistent and the most important to Republicans has been cutting taxes for the wealthy, to debase our public treasury, and transferring money from our public schools to this private voucher scheme, because the long-term goal is to undermine public education. We know that public education is the key to having a vibrant, functional democracy. It is the key to having a strong economy with a middle class. We can't do that without public education. But Republicans see a world where education is rationed based on your parents' wealth, based on the zip code that they can afford to live in. That's why they're content to let property taxpayers pick up the tab for way more of the public school system than we should, because it's inequitable. They're doing it because it's inequitable. Wealthy communities that will afford to raise their own property taxes can have wonderful schools, with highly qualified teachers that are able to be retained, and small class sizes, and science labs, and sports fields. And areas of the state, often urban and rural, that don't have the same property tax base are really going to struggle. And that's fine with Republicans, but it's not fine with me. Because education is a basic fundamental right, and it shouldn't be rationed based on your parents' wealth.
And also the thing about the referendums.
Yeah.
Funding school by referendums. And kids, I've seen a lot of the Marquette survey about pitting elderly taxpayers against our kids,
Right.
That's not right.
It's not right, and it's so divisive and hurtful for communities, and it's terrible fiscal policy. I mean, who can budget like that? The thing that school districts and municipalities and businesses need is consistency. They need to be able to plan. This is one reason that Trump has been so disastrous for the economy, is because you can't plan if you don't know what the future is going to look like. And if you have to, just on this April ballot that's coming up on April 7th, where we are going to elect my friend Chris Taylor to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And I came together in the abortion rights movement, and she followed me into the legislature, and it's very exciting that she's going to be serving on our court. So on April 7th, there are, I believe, 72 school referenda that are on ballots all around the state. Now, 10 of them are capital referendums, right, for new buildings or projects like that. 2 are combined, and the remaining 60 are operating referendum, just to keep the lights on, just to keep teachers in the classroom. And this is not unique. This has been happening in every single election, year after year. This is not a case where, this school district or that school district is just bad at managing money. They don't know how to do it. This is systemic. It is on purpose. and it is totally undermining our ability to provide a high-quality public education for all kids. My property taxes are too high, your property taxes are too high, and it is the Republicans' fault. They are the ones that have created this system. And as much as they're gonna yap about the 400-year veto and Governor Evers, the truth is, they control the legislature. They are the ones who have made these decisions year after year. And even in this session, we have given them many opportunities to fund our public schools appropriately, to prevent the very property tax hikes that we are now experiencing and paying for. They could have repealed that 400-year veto anytime. They have the votes, they control it, and a lot of Democrats would join them as long as they're willing to fund schools. They refused again and again. Why? Because they would rather have a political weapon to use against Governor Evers that you pay for, that we pay for out of our own pocket, than actually solve the problem.
Just a comment. You use the word capacity. I don't think the state of Wisconsin has the capacity to support two separate school systems and give every kid a comprehensive education and have it affordable. It's not affordable. They are backing themselves into a corner where they're going to continue to make the decisions that we're going to lessen the opportunities for the people in public schools, and I think the day is coming when they're going to have to lessen the opportunities for private schools. What has to happen now is they have to, pull up their pants, whatever you call it, as far as making a tough decision, and stop the funding of private schools and slowly phase out, let the kids finish, the track they're on to get out of it. And I emphasize that with my policymakers all the time. You guys and gals are backing yourself into a corner where you can't afford it, and since you can't afford it, you're going to reduce the opportunities for kids. That's bad news.
You're absolutely right. And you know what? This is an issue that is not just of concern to Democrats. I travel to some of the most conservative places in this state. On a daily basis, I'm talking with voters who are independent voters, and even Republicans. I actually have Republicans for Roys. That's the only affinity group I have for my campaign. They are concerned about this too. And that's because, whatever differences we may have, most of us really do want the best for our kids. We understand that education is the key. And the vast majority of Wisconsinites choose public education for their kids. Not homeschooling, not private education, even when it's funded by taxpayers. They choose public education because they know that is the best for their kids. And it's up to us to make sure that we are meeting the needs of kids. And listen, I'm a parent, I'm a business owner. I know that just money is not going to equal quality, right? We have to have high standards for teachers and for students. We have to get the distractions and the screens out of classrooms. That's why I support a bell-to-bell cell phone ban. I don't think we should have Chromebooks for elementary schools, other than if they're learning typing, right? We have to do other things, but you can't do it without money. And the idea that you can have quality schools but not pay for it is ridiculous. So you're gonna find me arguing for money for schools, not for its own sake, but because I want a high quality education, the best public education for every kid in Wisconsin, no matter who they are or where they're from. Yes.
I agree with you totally, but I guess my question is, this seems like a lot of this is a function of the legislature, not the governor. You don't get the Donald Trump executive order overriding Congress power. So what can you do as governor to move the needle on this?
Well, this is a big difference, I think, between me and many of the other good folks who are running for governor. I have been working to pass progressive policy and build democratic power for over 20 years in this state. And again, I have been able to get things passed in really tough legislative environments. Not just when Democrats were in control, but when Republicans have been in control, when we've had split control. And those skills are absolutely essential. And listen, even if we are lucky enough to have a Democratic trifecta, the idea that magic will just happen and we will end up with a properly funded school system and great health care for all, That ain't how it works. I wish it were, but I was there in 2009, and I love the legislature. I, have spent 10 years in the Senate and the Assembly. Those cats will not hurt themselves. There needs to be strong leadership from the governor. This is not a time where we can afford to wait for somebody to read a poll to decide, I don't know, should we fund our public schools and tax billionaires? We can't afford to have a blue ribbon commission to look at the issue of vouchers or whatever, or hold our finger up in the air and say, I don't know, is this going to be popular? We need a governor who is ready on day one, who has deep policy knowledge and convictions, and is ready to use all of her political power to get things done. So when I talk about throwing a punch and taking a punch for the children, this is what I'm talking about. We need to have a governor who will get all of our Democrats into a room and say, here's what we're going to do. Let's share our ideas. Let's do this together in a collaborative process, because politics is a team sport. The governor might be at the top of the ticket, but the governor can do a lot alone, but not a budget. So we have to get the legislature on board. However, the governor must provide leadership. The governor cannot be trying to satisfy everyone, and that's why it's important to have a governor who actually knows what the hell she's doing, and knows about these issues, and knows where the money needs to go and where it's hidden, and can help the legislature. The vast majority of Democrats in the legislature are new. They're new since COVID, right? They're brand new to politics, even though they're smart people and they're from different walks of life, which is great. But, the vast majority of Dems in the legislature have never, ever been in power. And so having strong leadership at the governor's office is important. Now imagine a scenario where we've got a Democratic Senate, which is going to happen. But we don't have a Democratic Assembly. We've got a narrowly Republican Assembly. Well, now you have a different framework, right, for how do you negotiate, how do you get something done. And again, you don't start your negotiations by saying, well, I'll just sign whatever they send me. That's how you end up with having a Democratic governor and yet the largest expansion of money going to vouchers. And no Medicaid expansion, right, year after year. That's not how I will operate as a negotiator. And there are many, many ways in which the governor can exercise power to bring people together. Procedural, there are carrots and sticks, right? I am well versed in all of those ways, and I will use every single tool at my disposal to get our priorities through, both budgetary and statutory.
So you were talking about money. This is tangentially related. In a recent report from the Wisconsin Department of Administration, they projected that the state's population will decrease by nearly 200,000 residents over the next 25 years. This is due to an aging population and declining birth rates. This demographic decline will shrink the tax pool and may cause labor shortages. How do you propose to reverse this trend?
Yeah, listen, Wisconsin is having a demographic shrink. We are a graying state, and this has been a long time trend. Now, it's not true in every area of the state. I actually represent the fastest growing area of the state in Dane County in the legislature. But part of the reason is because young people can't see this is a place where they can build the life that they want. We've had brain drain for decades, right? Where we raise young people, we educate them, and then they go off to what they perceive to be greener pastures. And sometimes, like me, they come back, right? I came back for law school because of in-state tuition and a scholarship. And then I ended up staying. 16-year-old me would probably be appalled. But I think it turned out pretty well for me. If we want young people to stay in Wisconsin, we have to make it possible for them to buy a house before age 40. We have to make it possible for them to pursue the career interests in education that they want to, whether it's technical college, whether it's the trades, whether it's the military or a four-year university, or starting a business. We have to make it possible for people to afford to have children. As a longtime reproductive justice advocate and as a mom, one of the things that hurts me the most about this world that we've created for young people is when they say, I'd love to have a kid, but I can't afford it. Because I can't afford childcare. We recognize society's responsibility to educate kids. That's why we have public K-12 education and higher ed. But the most expensive and the most vital years are birth to 5. That is when 90% of brain development happens. And we just say, parents, you're on your own. Congrats on your baby. Give us $100,000 so you can stay in the workforce until that baby gets to kindergarten. That's crazy. That's just crazy. So we have to have the structure in place and the public support so that young people can see themselves being able to thrive here. And by the way, there's also a cultural and a quality of life piece. I talked a lot about the economics and affordability, right? But young people don't want to live in a state that's polluted. Young people don't want to live in a state that's full of right-wing culture war nonsense where, there's conversion therapy instead of gay marriage, where abortion is criminalized and there's, no good sex ed in the schools. Young people want to live in a place that is forward-looking, where it feels like the government is there to help them and solve problems and not to stand in their way and drag us backwards. Yes.
Talking about decrease in population. This question has to do with what are you an environmentalist? But before you answer that
Yes.
part, you talk about some examples that prove that you are.
Yeah.
One of the things that's happening right now, I think the world population is around 8 billion, and you all hear all kinds of stories. Are we going to be able to support 10 billion people? Because we're approaching that mark very fast. More and more people that consider themselves environmentalists are adding one other solution to dealing with it, and is that control our population. Slow down the growth of our population so we don't, challenge the kind of things that make our earth less healthy. So really the best way to do it, not worry about population growth, let's worry about making sure that population is dealing with things that are not going to stress our environment. So what kind of things have you done as far as making consider yourself an environmentalist?
Well, I was raised to be an environmentalist because I was raised in Wisconsin, and to love and appreciate and play in all the beautiful natural spaces in the state. You're going to find me on the shores of Lake Superior in March doing the fastest dip once that ice goes out that I can, and I'm running immediately back into a warm sauna. Right? You're going to find me biking through our state parks. You're going to find me taking a hike with my kids, hike/amble, depending on who's with me and how fast they are or how much sugar they've had. And I do think that in terms of quality of life, it is one of the best things Wisconsin has going for us. By the way, it's also critical for our economy because tourism is one of our top 3 industries, along with agriculture and manufacturing. And agriculture is also heavily dependent on the environment. Now, Wisconsin has a long history of conservation leadership. In fact, my stepdad is a conservation attorney and somebody who has been on the forefront of putting together the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program and many of the environmental protections that we now have been enjoying for generations. So that is very important to me as an attorney, as a daughter, and as a lawmaker. I see it from all these different aspects. There are some very clear things that we know. Number one, climate change is real and it's costing us a huge amount of money. We need to help our state and our communities be more resilient to climate change, things like erosion of the Great Lakes and flooding and drought, wildfire smoke, right? All of these things are negatively impacting our quality of life. We also know that Wisconsin doesn't have any fossil fuels. So if we want to have energy, we either have to buy and burn old dinosaur bones that come from elsewhere, or we have to make our own energy. Fortunately, wind, solar, and geothermal work really well here, and they're also the cheapest and fastest new sources of energy for our state. So we can help reduce our carbon footprint, and I'd like to get all the coal-fired power plants offline over the next couple of years and replace them with lower energy costs and cleaner air. So we can all get behind it, right? I'll also say, I'm a big one on conservation, and probably this goes to my just being like a cheap, frugal, Midwestern mom. I love a deal. The cheapest energy is energy that we don't use, right? So expanding our successful conservation programs, our energy efficiency programs that help optimize our use of energy, requiring utilities to do integrated resource planning so we don't end up with overbuilding and then all of us have to pay the cost. This is another really important thing. We should have a focus on energy program that is for commercial and for industrial users. It works great for homeowners, but we need to really go after the biggest energy users and help them reduce their footprint. I have a lot of thoughts about the PSC and how we can help reduce our energy and decarbonize and have more clean and sustainable energy, but I'll leave those to if somebody else has a question about it.
You mentioned like natural disasters. Recently, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, Milwaukee and the surrounding areas were hit by a pretty intense flood. And to my knowledge, the Trump administration has not sent any type of relief funding for that. With, you know, the kind of hard stance that you're taking against the Trump administration, how do you see that playing out with, you know, requesting, negotiating federal assistance and at the same time pushing back?
I think my number one duty as a political leader is honesty. And I am never going to kowtow to a dictator because I think we'll get funds. I mean, nobody is nicer than Tony Evers. And we didn't get the funds. You just said it yourself, Gabe, right? So who knows how that person makes decisions. But I can tell you this. He has already reached the apex of his power, and his power is declining. And he will be held accountable. I don't know if it will be next year, or in 2 years, or in 3 years. But there will come a point, and we're already seeing it start to happen, where Republican politicians are not always going to go along with him. Not every Republican is Tom Tiffany. Tom Tiffany is a straight-up rubber stamp. The man has one thought in his head, and it's, what does Donald Trump want me to do today? That's Tom Tiffany. But not every congressman is like that. And I do believe that the way to get what we need as a state is to advocate clearly for it, to tell the truth, and to fight for it. Not to try to appease some dictator because we think if we say something nice to the dear leader that he's going to throw disaster relief our way.
I'm kind of asking a question that was asked of Aaron earlier, and that is about our elections being the way that we've always had them, and being worried about being preemptive rather than reactive, because once those go to the courts and, you know, they're contested, I hate to think what could happen. What are we doing, or what could you do legislatively? We have a special session coming up, maybe, to try to act preemptively to ensure that we have the free and fair election in November that we've always been used to.
I have never been more grateful for our extremely irritating and decentralized election system than I have been in recent years. There is no basis or mechanism for Donald Trump to nationalize the elections or to stop or halt the elections. We have free and fair elections in this country. And the most important thing that we can do, and all of us need to do it, is to assure ourselves that we still have our right to vote, and we will demand free and fair elections to proceed as they always do. If you haven't volunteered as a poll worker, do it. And bring your 16-year-old granddaughter or niece or nephew, because it's great to see how elections actually work. Now, will he try to disrupt? Yes. Will he lie and do all kinds of ridiculous propaganda? Yes. Will he abuse the court system as he did last time? Yes, of course. And I also think that a big part of what he's doing with ICE is to try to normalize violence and normalize the presence of, you know, creepy armed paramilitary on our streets, because it is one way that he can help undermine confidence in our elections and destabilize us. All of these things are real, and yet our only option is to continue to have free and fair elections in the state. And we can, our Attorney General has been very on top of this with legal action. Our clerks, our municipal clerks are well prepared because the Wisconsin Elections Commission is absolutely on top of this. Wisconsin was ground zero for the fake elector scheme. Ron Johnson, our US Senator, somehow still our senator, was part of that. So we are not, the people who are working on these issues are very, very well aware and very well versed about the challenges and the threats that they face. And I have a lot of confidence in these nonpartisan actors and in all of the clerks and poll workers across the state that they are going to be able to administer a free and fair election. And we don't have another choice. We cannot give into the cynicism and the fear. We can be clear-eyed about who the president is and what he's going to attempt to do, and also say it is our job to get out the vote and make sure that we are doing everything that we can. If you can volunteer to be a legal observer or an election protection volunteer or a poll worker, you can drive people to the polls. You can talk to people about how it is safe to go out and vote. You can help people to do early voting or vote by mail. All of these things are great options and places to channel all of the fear and fury that we rightfully have about this topic.
Kind of related to that, one of the worries I have about the election is the changes to the postal rules, because it does seem to be a way to suppress mail-in voting. People have said just bring it in, get it hand canceled, but it's still gonna go to the distribution center and we can't, get it postmarked again. So you don't know when you're postmarked. And I just wonder if that's something that people have their eyes on, because people would have to get mail-in ballots in well ahead of it. You can't just get it in at the last minute.
Right.
And assume it'll be postmarked.
Right, and there are many voting rights groups like the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, that are working to educate voters about these, the changes and what are the best ways to get your ballot in. Obviously, you can turn it in directly to the clerk, to the municipal clerk. You can get it, mail it back the first day, and Wisconsin actually has an absentee ballot tracker. So you can actually go on myvote.wi.gov and see if your absentee ballot was received or not. And if it hasn't been received, you can actually go on election day and vote at your polling place. So there are a lot of fail-safe mechanisms in place. But to your point, one of the things that Democrats must do in the next session at the state level is expand voting rights. We need to make sure that people have full, longer periods like we used to vote early, to vote by mail, that people should be able to choose voting by mail as their default option. You shouldn't have to request it every year on New Year's Day. I say, everybody make sure you, go to myvote.gov and request absentee ballots this year if that's what you want. You should be able to be permanently on that list. We should be able to have automatic voter registration in the state. We should be able to register students in high school so that they're ready to vote the minute that they turn 18. There's a lot that we can do to help elections run better and to expand access. Change our voter ID laws, which are purely a tool of voter suppression. There's no reason that an out-of-state driver's license or a student ID or a driver's license that's expired should not be considered valid for the purposes of voting, right? There's a lot that we can and will do.
When you become governor, you're going to have to work with the leadership in the Assembly and the leadership in the Senate. So Senator Lemonhew is my senator for this district.
Yep.
And I communicate with him all the time. And Ron Boss, I have a nickname for him. I call him Boss, because many times it seems he's running the show down the mass, even more than the governor. Have you had experiences dealing, especially across the House, as far as with him on certain issues and stuff, talking to him, and then as a governor, what kind of skills are you going to use to be able to communicate with both? It seems that so many times those two fellows don't get together with the governor to take care of each other. Yeah, and with each other to take care of issues. So
Yeah.
what would you do to fix that?
Well, let's just talk about it. So, Democrats are gonna control the Senate, so Devin Lemmick is going to be the minority leader, or somebody else will. Robin Moss is retired. And happy trips. And that's gonna be an opportunity for us, because there are many different factions within these caucuses. And in the absence of the iron fist of boss, that would be an opportunity for us to talk with some of the members that maybe didn't want to go all the way to the far right, as Voss did, right? I mean, we just saw this happen on the fight over Gale's law for breast cancer screening, and finally becoming the 49th state to expand Medicaid postpartum from just 60 days to a full year, right? So, you know, it was Democrats who demanded that on every single bill. They offered those amendments and forced the Republicans to basically say, go to Voss and say, we have to do this or we're gonna lose our elections. You have to let this through, even though you don't like it. And it worked. So I will just say, I'm a proud Democrat. We're all proud Democrats in this room. But I also have a very strong track record of working across the aisle, over 20 plus years, and I'm really proud of that. And I think anybody who wants to be governor of this state should always be saying, here's not just what I plan to do, but here's what I actually have done. Here's my track record of delivering on bipartisan success. I'll just give you one example. I already talked about the Compassionate Care for Rape Victims Act. 4 years in the Senate, I was the only Democratic legislator on a bill called the APRN Modernization Act. This is a bill to allow advanced practice registered nurses to practice independently to the full extent of their training, right, and their licensure, and not always have to be directly supervised by a physician. Now, I thought this bill was really important because we have a provider shortage in this state. And we also have a nursing shortage. And if we are losing out on our most educated nurses, that's going to have a devastating impact on patient care. Republicans were they were right on this issue. And the governor, our governor, whom we love, vetoed this bill several times. And it was hard for other Democrats who agreed with me to go up against our own Democratic governor. But eventually this session we were able to compromise and get more Democrats to basically come on board that the governor ended up signing this bill. And it took a few years, but we got this bill signed into law. That's an example of me working across the aisle. It did not endear me to the governor or his staff. And some of my Democratic legislative colleagues were frustrated at me too. But at the end of the day, we had overwhelming support for the bill and it became law because it was the right thing to do for Wisconsin. As governor, I'm going to be very clear about what my values are, what my plans are, but I will always work with anyone to try to make your life better, whether you voted for me or not. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not just going to go after Democratic votes. One of the reasons that I think I'm the best candidate to beat Tom Tiffany is because I already have Republican support. People who want a governor who knows what to do, who is responsible fiscally and with policy, and who will govern Wisconsin the way that we ought to be governed, with good government, not MAGA nonsense, not platitudes and bullet points, but actual plans and policies and the political will to get it done.
Closing statements.
Well, I really appreciate having this chance to talk with all of you, and we have a really important decision to make. And I spend a lot of time traveling around the state listening to people. So much of what I hear is the same, whether I'm in Trempealeau or Marinette or Beloit. Yesterday I was in Waushara and Wapaka, Shawano, Beloit, and Madison. And I was in Milwaukee on Friday. We are on the cusp of reclaiming Wisconsin's proud progressive heritage.
Yes.
We are a purple state, but we are also a blue state. And we can be a state where every single Wisconsinite, no matter who you are or where you're from, has the freedom to thrive. If we can elect elect a governor who is capable and willing to use political power to get us there. I want you to think about three things, because this is a political group, right? We're not the casual voters that stroll in on August 11th, not having thought about who we're going to vote for, right? You guys are on websites, you're checking on boxes and being like, well, I like what she said about that, but I didn't like this. So we're not normal, and I say that with all the love in my heart, right? That's how it goes when you're in a room like this. Think about three things. Think about who can meet Tom Tiffany. Who can help bridge that urban-rural divide? Who's talking about the issues that appeal to rural voters? And think about, for instance, Wisconsin's history of who do we elect statewide? People are like, I'll tell you who is skeptical. Is Madison, Dane County liberals, my people. Can a Dane County Democrat win statewide? I don't know. Who's the most popular elected official in our state right now, of either party? Anybody know? Senator Tammy Gold. Yes. Dane County Democrat. And a very important mentor of mine. Tony Evers, Jim Doyle, Russ Kleingold. Dane County Democrats. Who do, I'm sorry?
Also Plymouth, he's from Plymouth.
He's also from Plymouth. Yes, we can all claim it. Like, you know, Madison claims me, but Taylor County gets to claim me too, and Marshfield, right? We can share. And Portage, where my stepdad's from, you know. We have a really tough time in this state electing Democrats from the Milwaukee area. And I'm not just talking about Mandela Barnes, and that was a heartbreak race for all of us. I'm also talking about Tom Barrett, who ran twice and lost. And actually, Tom Barrett actually might be the nicest person in politics, even more so than Tony Evers. So we just have not had a good track record with Milwaukee area Democrats being elected statewide. Can a woman win? Absolutely.
Yes.
But if you're trying to elect a woman as governor, the number one factor is whether or not she has deliverables, whether she can show that she has experience, that she's gotten things done. And we've got a lot of good candidates in the race, but most of them are brand new or just a couple of years into politics. This is going to be a tough, punishing race where the worst people in the world are going to spend $100 million lying about our nominee.
Yeah.
We can't have somebody that's making unforced errors. We can't have somebody that's going to be caught off guard by a reporter's question and say something dumb and then have to backtrack. We can't have somebody that's not ready to take the fight aggressively to Tom Tiffany for his terrible record of hurting Wisconsinites. We need a really strong candidate to withstand that. And I have been doing this for 25 years. I cut my teeth. Yes, you can clap for that. You can always clap. It's not television. I can hear you. I cut my teeth in my early 20s going on Fox News, on the O'Reilly Factor with Laura Ingraham, and Christian radio talking about abortion. So, you know, and I've been a woman on the internet for 20 plus years, so you're not going to catch me, you know, saying something dumb or being unwilling to go anywhere, to talk to anyone to get the votes that we need to win. I'm going to go after the Evers-Johnson voters and the Tammy Trump voters, and that's how we're going to win. But the second thing you need to think about is who can win the primary. And we've got a crowded field, but the recent Marquette poll showed, to my delight and shock, that nobody, well, first of all, nobody's paying attention, right? The vast majority of voters are undecided. But even the candidates that are best known, Mandela Barnes and Rodriguez, have the highest negatives, and knowing their name does not translate into support. So all the candidates are basically in a statistical dead heat. We're all within 10 points of each other. The margin of error is 6.5% in that poll, and I haven't spent $1 on voter contact, whereas some of the other candidates have spent tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. I am running for governor, and I know how you need to frugally raise money and spend it at the end on effective voter contact if we want to be successful and if we want to win. So this is a wide open race, which means that we can choose the candidate and back her early to help overcome the built-in name ID advantage that Mandela Barnes has if we want a different nominee in this race. But I need need your help and your support early, right? I need you to give money. I have a little QR code back there and I have envelopes. I need you to sign up on my little clipboard so we can stay in touch. I need you to tell your friends and be evangelists and take a little button with my name on it. That word of mouth is what's gonna help us build momentum before I can afford to get on the air, to get my name out there. And that leads me to the third and most important point. This is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to put our state back on the right trajectory. And who, of all the candidates running, do you think has the experience, the progressive values, the knowledge, and the utter commitment and drive to be best equipped to be our next governor? I hope you agree that it's me, and I hope you'll join Team Kelda and help build it together. Thank you so much.
All right, let's give one more round of applause for both of our speakers. And for your information, our next Candid with Candidates installment will be on March 28th, same time, same place. And the speakers will be Brad Smith and Sarah Rodriguez.
That's
Yes.
the same day as the No Kings rally.
Sorry, March 29th.
Oh. Sunday.
Two questions. One, is this going to be available on the Democratic Sheboygan site?
That video will be. That will be PBS Now.
Oh, good.
Correct?
So that'll be available. And what's the schedule? Are we going to get through all the candidates by a certain date?
We're hoping to we're going to get through the congressional candidates and hopefully the governor candidates before the primary. We may have we may have a treasurer candidate be coming in for this series. Good question.
So before August, no?
Yes. Yeah, so there's probably going to be a couple of months.
It'd be nice if we can get it done as soon as possible.
Sure.
So people can start making decisions about it.
That's the intention, give the candidates the platform to, say who they are, what they stand for, and then for you guys to get that information and then invest in whichever race you believe in. So yeah, we're going to try to do our best to get them out as quickly as possible without burning ourselves out.
Okay. Sounds good.
Any other questions? Okay, March 29th, same time, same place. Thank you guys.